issue is people who have documents and information in places they shouldn't. I may not be alone in this, but my first thought is Chris Horner. Not because he's done it, but because he's unearthed so much of it. Most of it in his pursuit of where all the money and the bodies are buried in the world of the climate, I think the bootleggers and the Baptists is what he calls them. And it eventually became the best-selling work, The Liberal War on Transparency, at the culmination of this quest. Lisa Jackson and the EPA working off book with folks in the environmental lobby to create policy that comes after you and your farm and wherever you may be. And he's back on the phone with us from the Government Accountability and Oversight Group. He is the great Chris Horner. Thank you, Chris, so much for your time. I know it's very precious. How are you doing, first and foremost?
I'm great. Thanks, Joe.
So when you hear about, and maybe I'm wrong, but these classified documents that show up at all these people's offices, I was looking at mine wondering if I have classified documents in my office. The first thought I had was, well, what if I want to see them and I'm a citizen and I issue a FOIA request saying I want to see what the vice president did on some trip to Ukraine, and they say, I'm sorry, there are no documents here about it because they're at the Penn Biden Center. That bothers me a little bit.
Yeah, there's a whole lot in what you raise, and the first is let's just recognize that folks ought to holster their piety, because I'm here to tell you there is very low regard for federal records laws. There is records management training that's required. There's some overlapping ethics training, and nonetheless, we have this promiscuity among, since they're in power, the ones we know most about, Biden administration appointees, in using, I could go through it takes a little explanation, but using encrypted apps, let's say on their personal phone for work, which you're not allowed to do. There's no, for the very simple reason that it evinces an intention that you're trying to keep that out of the clutches of the people who own the records. That is the government, which is us. Mm-hmm. And so, but we have, it doesn't take much effort to discern. If you work at the SEC, I can show that you probably have Signal on your phone. If you work at the Treasury Department, you're a Biden appointee, Signal. You work on the House Ways and Means Committee as a Democratic staffer, Senate Finance staffer, Signal. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission they're sort of partial to WhatsApp. And again, I think we've discussed this before. It could be just coincidental, but it does this synchrony among appointees at various agencies to go student body, Signal, or WhatsApp does suggest that that's probably how they communicate. Mm-hmm. And it's our job to prove that they are. And public policy groups that I represent, and in some suits that the GAO, who you mentioned, supports, will seek these. And it's up to, typically, they ask the official, like they asked the Bidens, search your own stuff and tell me if there's anything I'd want to see or these people would want to see. Right. And for years the answer was no.
Well, of course not.
They don't.
Would I put a lit match in the stove if my pal Bugsy was in here?
But things slip through, and I could tell you stories. But anyway, there was a funny email in some litigation discovery I was reading last night where the counsel was saying, after claiming no records, remember you just described a no records response, mm-hmm. And we said, so you don't have this?
Oh no.
So the law doesn't require perfection. It just requires where they might reasonably be. And you don't have this? Well, once again, it's and here's my reasons why we don't. That happens a lot. There's a game being played. It's not supposed to be played. You're supposed to use the device and the accounts that the government issues mm-hmm. you, whether this is the state, local, or federal level. But if you don't, well, as a man said, I paid for this microphone. I may not have paid your phone bill on the phone you're using Signal on to write about your SEC work, but those are records. Those are public records. Now, Biden's classified records, those aren't. That's exemption 1 under FOIA. Classified stuff isn't covered, but you do get into interesting issues about. Yeah, I don't think you waive that, but you can waive privilege.
Well, the other thing that came up, and I'm going to stick a pin in the whole, it doesn't seem like all that long ago you and I were talking about using Gmail and Yahoo Mail to work off book, and now I guess it would only go on without standing that they would start to invent new ways to work outside of it. So I'm going to try to stick a pin in that and ask about the classified documents. Freedom and Prosperity Radio is a public service broadcast of the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. You can find out more about us online at virginiainstitute.org and join our Tuesday morning group coalition meetings or go to our YouTube channel. I watched John Bolton explain that pretty much every piece of paper in the White House, short of the toilet paper roll, is classified. Do we also have an overclassification problem that I've heard some of the talking heads behind the TV news desk talk about? Overclassification? ? That they're classifying everything, and then somebody like you or me as a citizen couldn't find it because, well, that's classified. It's similar to the way our friend Matt Harden was trying to get some records out of a local county, and it was told that's a personnel matter. And you say, well, hold it, the personnel in question are being paid with our taxes. How is it? We're not allowed to see that. But you understand they're creating like an invisibility shield on this by just saying, "Oh, that's classified." It was the lunch order. It's classified.
Right, and I believe I saw it on cable, so it's probably true. The White House menus are classified. I think that's the case. There's definitely an overclassification problem, and that's showing a little ankle at the real problem, which is, we'll just call it human nature. We have, what is FOIA? FOIA says public records are, I hope you're seated, public, unless they fall into one of 9 enumerated exemptions. And the first, they're pretty obvious, classified information, and there are personnel file type information. That's abused. What it means is if there's something in there about a loathsome disease, okay, well, that gets redacted. Get out the marker. Yeah. But it's abused like mad, and I can't tell you, I must have a dozen lawsuits at the federal level where they abuse, well, that's B6 personnel type information, and they just toss it out there like Mardi Gras beads, but it's not. Here's the big one, and it's the trickle down from what you're seeing at this overclassification problem just because it's a lot easier that way. There's something called deliberative process, which is sort of bureaucratic privilege. You've got attorney-client, attorney-work product, and they fall into that too. But if you're in FOIA, they'll claim B5, and you're looking at papers just covered with stamps of, quote, B5. That says deliberative process, and that's supposed to mean anything. But as Matt and I both pointed out in a recent pleading, that is known as the because I don't want to exemption. It's the most abused, and if they just think, what the heck? And I'll go back to an old favorite of yours and mine, the Richard Windsor case, where we found the Obama EPA administrator named Lisa Jackson using a name created from the street she lived on and her pet's name, yes. And that was her false identity. It was an email in the name of Richard Windsor. You're not allowed to do that. It has to say who you are. And that was just the beginning of the problems. But we had 120,000 either pages or documents, either way, let's just call it a lot, before the judge, that they were claiming, you guys can't see that, it's B5. And it's a game they play, yet another one. They're daring you to try to discern you end up doing a Monte Carlo, a random sample. When they just run a roller over everything to hide public information from the public. You are stuck with tools like a random sample for the judge to take a look and see if they're abusing it. They are, and it is so regular that they're testing to see if you'll sue. If you do sue, they're testing to see if they can so overly aggressively abuse it that you're in the dark, they're not. The judge can see them if judge agrees to, but then it's like, well, I'm obviously not going to look at 100,000 pages. Give me a random sample of 50. And this is all turning the intention of this law and all of these open records laws on their heads. It's a game they play. They treat them as withholding laws. Again, these are our records. This is our information. We deserve to know how these institutions that have tremendous power, that do, and at the end of a gun, how they're being used, how they came to be used this way, who they're being used that way with, and sadly, at whose request.
Well, like you said with Lisa Jackson, who was punished in such a severe way, she had to go work for Apple and the Clinton Foundation for her misdeeds. And I say that intentionally to make people go, "What?" Because we were just discussing when is somebody going to actually be punished for breaking these laws? I guess it's only fair we're not punishing people for shoplifting anymore. So why would we punish these white collar criminals? But that deliberative process was what she was doing with Greenpeace through her Richard Windsor accounts. If I remember your reporting on it, Chris, was that the deliberative process was tell me what you want the environmental policy to be, Greenpeace, and then it happened. The same with Michael Mann at the University of Virginia and or Penn State, depending, where he was making his hockey stick graph, and you were able to find other universities that would share the other end of his emails, but you'd still had to fight UVA to find out what he was doing on the taxpayer's dime in this deliberative process, and I think that's a very important part of the story.
Yeah, it takes a very brazen bureaucrat or political appointee to try to claim deliberative process when they correspond with outside parties, because it doesn't apply. You've waived any privilege when we have Treasury working up green schemes with a Bloomberg activist, and they claimed internal deliberative. So the Bloomberg guy works for you? Yeah. Let's talk about this. Well, okay, so they dropped it because we asked, are you claiming this is a consultant, this activist? Because otherwise, I'm afraid you're going to have to show me yours. Well, with Richard Windsor, Lisa Jackson, she carried two phones. There's some people, we call her, there's a lady up there named Sarah, two phones blank. She actually just left the agency. The general counsel of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, who's charged with making sure everybody complies with the law, he's using two phones. We found the chairman was only using his personal phone. Another commissioner is using both phones. Lisa Jackson used a Verizon BlackBerry to correspond with the Sierra Club. We have a great message from her, a Buck Turgidson message. I told you never to call me here. She's telling a Siemens lobbyist, hey, when you want to reach me, get me at my home email. And she gave her Verizon email. I mean, again, there are designated ethics officials, and they're overseen by general counsels. And the general counsels are doing this. People who take ethics. We have an email from Mary Shapiro, hired by Michael Bloomberg to run his global warming activist. You know about ESG and all of this they're trying to do to strangle your access to money. Mm-hmm. Well, she was hired by him to do this. She was the former chair of the Securities and Exchange Commission. She underwent this training. And you know what she does to lobby the Treasury Department officials on this?
I'm afraid.
It slips through. She goes to their Gmail. So she knows better. She knows better, but here's the thing. Even though these trial lawyers, the plaintiffs' lawyers, get a bad rap for asking for $1 million because somebody spilled coffee in their lap, they got it. Sorry, it's not personal. It's what I do. Sorry, juries, you shouldn't award these silly awards. He's going to ask for it. You don't have to give it to him. Well, these people, when they go through the revolving door, they went through their training. They know what's supposed to happen, but they're going to leave it in your lap. And either you will, as required, forward it because they're lobbying you about Bloomberg's scheme, and they're testing you, sending it to your Gmail. There's a guy who just left the Treasury Department, the senior climate advisor. Yep, we have one. It was just announced yesterday that he's gone through the revolving door. He, too, is using his Gmail to be lobbied by these Bloomberg activists. It's an absolute epidemic. There is less than no regard for the legal obligations among this.
Do you hold?
I'll just say the Biden administration, Joe. I will just tell you that I know enough people who worked in the Trump administration who, when I show them this, say they just can't believe it. They say if we did this, they would have had our blank.
Oh, sure. There would have been orange jumpsuits involved, I'm sure. Along with 6 weeks worth of commentary from various cable networks about how this just proves Trump is a reprobate. But what about these guys like Jim Jordan and these committees that are supposedly looking into some of these behaviors? I think the worst we're going to see. I mean, gosh, Lisa Jackson was at a state dinner for Emmanuel Macron with Tim Cook from Apple. So I don't think she's suffering a lot in her ignominy after being caught doing this. It's like that Saturday Night Live skit. Ooh, punish me. Ooh, punish me next.
So there are two things. There's definitely a double standard, and I'll just say there's a gentleman named Bill Wareham. I don't know him. He was a very senior official in the Trump EPA, and the Greens and the political left on Capitol Hill sought to destroy him because there was a member of an audience he addressed was a former client. And there are Washington Post and Hill stories they tried to ruin the guy. Professionally at the time, they succeeded short term. Let's just say they made his life hell. Mm-hmm. Okay, he briefed an audience in which a former client was a member, and they ran him out. Well, we have a commissioner right now of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, a quasi-judicial, quasi-policymaking organization who came from green groups. She came ultimately from Tom Steyer's Energy Foundation. Oh. Well, we found her and have text messages now from FOIA litigation in which she's participating in her former client's quarterly calls. She's briefing, quote, the usual group of funders of Tom Steyer's Energy Foundation, who was her client before she joined FERC as a commissioner. And Fox News ran a big piece on it, and that was the end of it. She got passed over for the chairmanship. I think it's because of pecuniary interests that I imagine will come out. There's a statutory prohibition on her serving, unless she's got a waiver, which nobody can find, and they're not saying. But that was it. If she was passed over for chair, how is she still serving? Yeah. She did. Bill Wareham, the poor guy, they tried to ruin him because he addressed an audience in which a former client sat. She's briefing the funders expressly, and you know how the text message exchange from the former client began? Hi, Allison. I don't know if this is inappropriate, but narrator.
You can't make this stuff up, Chris.
Semaphores. So that's one thing. There's a double standard. You're not supposed to do it. I'm not saying what Bill Wareham did was wrong. I am saying what the FERC commissioner did was wrong. Yeah. Bill Wareham, they tried to destroy him. She's still serving. Now, why aren't there consequences? Well, in the law, there are supposed to be, and hats off to Virginia. A few years ago, the legislature passed an up to $1,000 per event fine to be paid by the individual, not by us. That's the problem when agencies get caught abusing the law, or let's say, when GAO sued UCLA Law School, mm-hmm. and ultimately we won. They dragged this litigation out for years, and they paid our local counsel. Our time wasn't compensated, but they paid our local counsel $225,000. and his bill was nearly $1 million, right? But guess who paid? Nobody who did anything wrong. The taxpayer. And the same thing in Virginia, it's different, where the principal is to pay, but you don't see this enforced. And when you and I were corresponding recently, it gave me pause, and I looked up, and you can actually find these bureaucrats at the federal level for their bad faith serial violations. And it shouldn't require bad faith or serial, but that's the only way you're going to get it.
Right.
And I just have not seen, if anybody gets penalized for this, it's going to be a Republican or in a Republican administration. That's just for reasons we've discussed. Because I just have to tell you, when I show former White House staff these things, the look on their face and the words out of their mouth, utter shock and disbelief. If we would have done this, well,
Truth.
It's going on. I can't, just the things I've been tossing out here off the top of my head.
Well, no, and it's
an epidemic, and what are you going to do about it?
Well, at some point they're going to run out of money they've printed, I guess. Chris Horner is on with us, Government Accountability Oversight. I got to let you go. I really appreciate it, Chris. What stuff is in the pipeline right now, or will this keep me up at night knowing about it?
You can find a lot of new revelations about how politicians are being served with off-book staff at the municipal level if they file climate lawsuits or join the climate litigation industry. You can find that at climatelitigationnwatch.org. There are some recent revelations about Treasury and the Securities and Exchange Commission, with more coming very near term at govoversight.org.
Okay.
And I just hope that very soon you're going to see more about this FERC. My jaw truly.
Oh yeah.
I'm shocked but not surprised, just the extent of the abuse. And now the lawyer who's been overseeing this, and they're stonewalling us. We have 15 lawsuits against them, and because they're stonewalling. And the guy in charge orchestrating the stonewall looks like he's going to be the commissioner to replace the last one who got in trouble for this. So
of course.
It's less than you get promoted, essentially, rather than dinged, I guess.
Yeah, we'll punish you up there, and and FERC is such for an agency, an acronym very few people even knew 10 years ago. The amount of damage they've done to our economy, the cost of fertilizer for my farmer friends, and all of this is just all under their banner of doing good.
Trying to become a climate regulatory agency to restrict, the availability of stuff that works. It's just, where did this come from?
Yeah,
and
this
they're
is why,
all climate agencies now, even though they're not.
Well, this is why I suggest people going back and reading your collected works of, Red Hot Lies and Power Grab, because you lay out exactly what is going on here. And though the technology has changed, I don't think the agenda has, and it is. I guess we all need marketing departments. Some of them just come looking like government agencies. Chris, I appreciate it as always, and thanks again. So it's climatelitigationnwatch.org and govoversight.org. You have a blessed morning, sir, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe. You too.
Thank you for joining us this week on our Freedom and Prosperity Radio visit. And you can find archives of this program on our YouTube channel. Search Freedom and Prosperity Radio. On behalf of all of us here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, I'm Joe Thomas. Until next week, so long, and thanks for all the fish.